Good morning, you guys. I hope that you are all well, and I hope you're able to go to church via live stream today. I'm getting set to head out and go lead worship myself. But this morning we're in the book of Job, and we're picking up in Job chapter 23, where we start with Job once again. Now he's answering Eliphaz, and he's basically saying he's choosing bitterness. And he's saying, you know what, my troubles, all that I've had, he goes and he blames God. A little reminder here about Job. If you remember at the very beginning of the book of Job, what was happening? Satan came and he accused Job to God. He's basically saying, check out Job here. So Job's troubles began because Satan was accusing him. They didn't begin because God was attacking him. Satan was attacking him. Good morning, Diane. Good to see you. But Job blames God. Now, Job didn't know about that conversation, and that conversation, frankly, is hard to understand. But we look here that Job is blaming God nonetheless. And if we look at Job 23, 1 through 7, it says, Then Job answered, Today also my complaint is bitter. So today also, he's staying in this perpetual state of bitterness. His hand is heavy despite my groaning. So God isn't hearing me. If only I knew how to find him so that I could go to his throne. So first I'm going to pause on Job here for a second. Do you know how to find God? You know, Job was saying he's a righteous man, and he was. And if we look at the end, which we're not there yet, we're going to see that God has encouragement for Job. But we can go to God. God invites us, and I'll get to those verses in a minute. But I think a lot of times people feel like God doesn't see, God doesn't hear, and those are lies from Satan. But he says, I would plead my case before him. So this is what he's going to do when he gets to God's presence. I'm going to plead my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would learn how he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he prosecute me forcefully? No, he would certainly pay attention to me. Then an upright man could reason with him, and I would escape from my judge forever. Do you hear what Job's saying here? I'm going to go tell God a few things. He's going to say I'm okay, and I'm going to escape him. That's what happens when we have a wrong understanding of God, a wrong understanding of how good he is. And Job does not understand why God would allow suffering. Isn't this the question we have today? We want to know why. And as Job said, to learn how God would answer him. What would be God's answer? So Job chose bitterness, and he chose to blame God and not to trust him. And Job described himself going to the throne of God full of words defending himself. And the reason why I laughed about that earlier is, y'all, when we get into the presence of God, all the things we don't understand down here, we're just going to be so overwhelmed by his presence and his goodness that the things that mattered so much we realize just don't matter. But here are a couple verses that describe what it will be like before God's throne, which, by the way, God invites us to come. We do actually deserve his judgment, but he chooses to sit on a throne of mercy for those who were his enemies, and he allows us to enter his presence. Ecclesiastes 5:1, and this is the New International Version, says, Guard your steps. When you go to the house of God, go near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools who do not know that they do wrong. Here's the bottom line. We all do wrong. We all fall short of the glory of God. And so we really don't have a defense for ourselves. We can only go and ask for God's mercy. Now that may not seem fair because we might say, well, look at the good deeds of this person or that person. But we just don't understand that anything good in us is only Christ. And so this was another misunderstanding on Job's part. Job's wrong was accusing God. He was believing false things about him and questioned his character. And he felt entitled to blessing for his good works. I get it. sometimes when really hard things happen in your life and you didn't do anything to bring it on, there can be this wondering like, wow, how did this happen? Hebrews 4:16 has another promise for us. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Good morning, Lisa and Margie. So good to see you guys. We can confidently approach God, but not because we think we are righteous, because He's good. Even when we suffer, God is still good, and God delights to give us mercy and grace. A lot of the pain we go through down here is a consequence of living in a fallen world, and our God is with us through those consequences. We have free will, and when man sins, there are ugly, hard consequences, but God is still good. May this encourage you today, whatever you are going through, even during this pandemic, our God is still good. May we all approach His throne with prayers and requests, but not with accusations. Our God can be trusted. He is faithful. And let me just say, even I remember back in 1988 when I became a Christian, I didn't really understand why everyone was saying God is good. Like, I know that sounds funny, but when you're first a Christian, you're trying to understand all these things, and God is great. He's not just good. But His goodness, there's nothing vile in Him. So, we can question one another. We can look at things that people do and we can say, that's wrong. There's nothing wrong in God. That's such a place of comfort and worship. So when Satan tempts us to accuse God because of hard things, we can know God is good. We can know His character. So Job wanted to escape what he considered as God's judgment. Job considered it almost a prison that he could not escape God's watchful eye. But to those who know God's comfort, His watchfulness, God's goodness, it is a comfort that He's watching us. The next few verses are a place of worship for me, and they're also the scripture verses of the day. It's taken from Job 23:8-10, and this is the CSB translation, and it's simply, God sees us. God sees you, friend, and He cares. It says, if I go east, He is not there. If I go west, I cannot perceive Him. When He is at work to the north, I cannot see Him. When He turns south, I cannot find Him. Yet He knows the way I have taken. And when He has tested me, I will emerge as pure gold. Job's having a hard time finding God, but the truth is our God is omniscient, all-knowing, omnipresent, present everywhere, which is so huge and blows our mind, right? But He knows the way we've taken. He knows the very hairs on our head. And He cares for us, even during this pandemic, especially during it. So here are some of the false accusations we see from Job. In Job 24, Job starts off saying God is not judging the wicked. Haven't we seen this before? This theme? Psalm 73, reminiscent of that, where David is once again, he was saying he's envying the wicked. His feet almost slipped until he went to the house of God, until he went before God's throne, until he came and worshiped God. Guys, if you're struggling right now, the remedy is getting into God's presence. It's getting into His word, crying out, saying, God, help me understand. God, I trust You even though I don't get what's going on right now in our world and I'm afraid. God can meet you at that place. In verse 12, after describing the deeds of the wicked in previous verses, Job says, yet God pays no attention to this crime. That's a lie. Just call it out as a lie. When you think a bad thought about God, it's a lie, it's a lie. That's what we need to tell ourselves. And in Job 24, verses 23 and 24, Job says God is basically just watching our ways like a judge. And the righteous shrivel up and die like everyone else. Yeah, Job's right when he says, I chose bitterness. But then he challenges his pals to prove him a liar. And we'll get there next Sunday. So how about you? Have you tasted and seen that God is good? How do you do that? Well, I offered last time a prayer of salvation. You can ask God to open your eyes. Lord, show me. Even when I came to know Christ, I said, Lord, I don't believe, but I want to. Will you help my unbelief? If you're doubting God's goodness right now, He can help you. No struggle that we have is too big for our God. And even now, we have no idea what God has spared us from, y'all. You're loved with an everlasting love. May we set our face to know God, to trust His character and promises, and worship Him during this time. This will be a sweet sacrifice of praise. Y'all go with God, and Lord willing, I'll see you tomorrow.